All right, so I've been working away on my basket a bit. You can see I've got close to the end of the pine needles that we added. I've also gotten close to the end of my first piece of sinew. So because I have 2 pine needles ending at about the same length again, I'm going to add one a bit early, one close to when they end, and then these ones clearly have a fair difference in length, so that's an obvious sort of gap and difference there. And I'm recording this part because it is going to become a little trickier, since between some of those pine needles, I am going to have to add my next piece of sinew in. So like before, I am going to add a loop and not cinch it quite so tight. Fuss with inserting my pine needle into the middle. Sometimes I find it's easier to sort of decide where you want the other needles to go and separate a bit of a hole before you insert it. Ideally you can get it into the middle so that you're hiding the end of it, but I oftentimes have some ends that are a bit visible in my basket, and I don't really find that to be a problem. Let's see if I can... So if we're looking at this one, I would say those darker spots are probably where I have some ends showing. That's an end there. You can tell it's really not a problem. All right, so I got that end kind of in there. Want to be careful not to drop it. I'm going to cinch that loop shut, kind of adjust it over there, keep it tight. Gently hold everything in place and try not to stab my finger while I get my next loop on there. And then as I pull that snug, I would now say that needle is pretty secure. And you can tell I'm kind of adjusting these and pulling these forward. For me, that's more just to make sure I've got tension around this new needle. But a pattern will actually emerge as your basket grows, where the stitches of sinew sort of extend backwards in a diagonal from where you started, that creates this wonderful sort of spiral look as the beading tray grows. I'm just going to keep calling it a basket. It's a basket weaving technique, but a beading tray is a nice little way to begin to learn it, and something that I think will be useful to everyone I believe is taking this course. So I've got that needle in. I've still got 2 more I'm going to want to replace soon, and I'm getting close to the end of my sinew. I'm going to add a few more stitches and then get on top of that sinew problem. And I almost pulled my needle right off of my sinew there, so I think that's about enough, or short enough rather, for me to now attach a new piece. So I've got my arm span's length of sinew. It's 1/5 of the kind of thicker main body of the thread. I cut an arm's length and then I separated the 5 strands. I usually just will wrap them around my fingertips loosely as a way to keep them organized. You can see here's the other 4 strands from that piece. And it's pretty easy to separate them out. I will say that if you get a knot in your sinew, they're not particularly easy to undo if they get pulled really snug. So don't try to wrap it too tight or anything, just these loose coils is great. And with that, I am going to attach this to my piece. Now, as you'll remember, we are pulling the previous stitches snug kind of as we progress. So the knot I'm going to make where I attach my new piece of sinew, I'm going to try to have come really close to where it's coming out of this previous stitch, because when we pull it all snug, ideally I will get it to line up on the sort of back of this part of the coil, and that will allow me to just hide and kind of enmesh the knot into the basket as I bring it farther along. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that here. And I just do kind of basic overhand knot. If you loop the pieces and then loop them again, you wind up with a knot that you can kind of manipulate. Like you'll find if you pull one thread, it kind of tends to go one way, or you can pull it the other way. I find that useful for getting it nice and close to where my thread is coming out of my basket there. And then, sorry, let me get it close again because I was trying to demonstrate instead of actually doing what I wanted. Okay, and then I'm gonna put a third cinch in there, and that'll really help to keep it in place a bit better instead of sliding around as you saw I just had it doing. Okay, so I've got these tails here, and I'm not going to keep them quite this long, but I don't need to trim them off yet. That can actually be kind of useful to have them. And I'm going to put my needle on the long new piece of sinew I have added. And I think when I was explaining at the beginning of the tutorial, I didn't say quite as clearly as I might have liked to. What you usually do with the length of your sinew is put your needle at almost halfway with just a bit more length on your working end. So there's my two ends. One's here and one's here, and there's just a bit of loose sinew that I'm working with, and you can keep moving this piece to be shorter through your needle as you progress. So I want to get this next stitch in here, and I want to do it a little bit more carefully than when I was just kind of working along before, because I don't want to tug that knot too tight and have it shift kind of completely to the one side of my basket. Gonna get my next loop on here too. Or rather get my next stitch started. And then as I pull it tight, and you can see with that fresh piece of sinew I've got a lot to pull through there, I'm going to put these tails just through there, so I'm actually keeping them with my pine needles. And then this new loop and stitch is going to help to hold them snugly in place. That will keep things kind of tidy and allow you to sort of to make those knots without cutting the sinew so short that you know they might start coming unbound. You get to keep those tails for a little bit more security. Gonna get another loop in here. And I'm still watching those tails. But as I mentioned, this is a bit of a tricky spot, and I've got another pine needle ending right away too. So I'm gonna keeping track of these, but I haven't pulled this loop too tight here. And I'm going to go ahead and add the next needle right in the middle of those other needles. Okay. So I got that in, pulled that loop tight. I'm going to slide it forward a bit too, because you can kind of see the end there, and I want it a little bit more over that, so this hopefully won't fall out on me. My next stitch on, so it's quite secure. And you can see that the end's going to be a little bit visible there, but it does change color when it dries out, and I don't find that to really be a problem at all. It's not super obvious, it's not going to look bad, it's just going to be another part of the basket. And as I'm doing this, because I've got these ends here, I'm going to still keep track of where they're at. I probably won't keep them this entire length to stitch into the basket. In fact, I could probably trim them off here, but I'll put a couple more stitches over before I trim them off, just because I find that keeps everything more secure. And I like it better that way. And it will be a little bit more challenging when you've got your brand new piece of sinew on there to keep track of your tail and keep everything organized. But it will get shorter surprisingly fast as you move your basket along, and you'll have to add new pine needles a lot more often as you progress too than you had to in this initial small area of your basket. And so you can see there is my knot, and there are the ends coming along with my pine needles. I've done about 5 stitches over them, that's plenty. And I am just going to trim them off there. I've got another pine needle ending right away, so I'm going to do a few more stitches and then start adding the pine needle to replace that one. And I will be well on my way to continuing to fill out and create the bottom of my beading tray. Okay, this is great too. I didn't do it on purpose, but my sinew started to knot, I noticed. I've just sort of gently pulled it apart, and I found that it was like just a tail tangled in there, so luckily I saved myself from that knot. I'm gonna unhook that extra pine needle there from my loop, and I can go ahead and pull it tight. Crisis averted. Definitely, if you do find something is knotting because this is such a waxy thread, don't try to pull it tight and hope it'll loosen itself. Be gentle with it, see what's going on, and you can usually find the source of the little tangle before it'll really become a problem.